Well, hello, everybody. I'm Greg Fitzgerald. Thank you for attending this session on a provocative topic of Are Vulnerability Scanners Dead? Very fascinating being a part of this organization and seeing what has been talked about from this morning, yesterday, and today about vulnerability scanners. And the last presentation alone was about got to do vulnerability scanning and then penetration testing. So we'll spend a little bit of this time today talking about, is that true and at what level? And my job today is really to hopefully have you see there's an easier way to do your job. So I just kind of started out a little bit. It's kind of funny. I do feel like a zebra in a field of horses. I'm the only guy here with a jacket, the only guy sitting with a jacket the entire day. So I'm a little overdressed for the occasion, but I want to thank you for letting me be on the formal side. Given my age here, I'm definitely seeing the crowd. I'm like, I was always told to dress better than the crowd that you're presenting to, so hopefully this will get us there. My name again is Greg Fitzgerald. I'm a co-founder of this company called SAINTCON Security. I've been in the business about 27 years. I actually started in the finance area, got a couple of master's degrees, and realized what I'm really good at is being a translator. Translator between what engineering and engineers and coders are creating to change the world and the general market that needs to know about it. And then vice versa on the features, capabilities that needs to be built in those products and translating them back. So I've been very blessed, and I'm very blessed to be in Utah in the sense of being able to see this beautiful state. I'm from Texas, and I've been able to be a part of most of the technologies you have worked with or still work with today, companies that all the way back in the 90s from BMC Software, from systems management, on forward to intrusion prevention systems. Sorry, guys. Intrusion prevention systems. I've been a part of unified threat management products. I've been the founder of a company called Cylance, which was bought by BlackBerry, which is the first AI-based antivirus. And since then, I've been an investor and builder of technologies. And one of these here is SAINTCON Security, because the general premise of everything I see about attacks is how do you protect what you don't know? So as I kind of move forward to this next phase here, the idea is to allow for the technology advancements to help you do your job. Being from Texas, I'm also a big fan. There's a great book that talks about the expansion of the West through the just immigration of other people and migration of people, but mostly when they ran across the Indians. And what's fascinating is the Native American Indians, especially the Comanches in the state of Texas through Oklahoma, over here through the West, were vicious. And technology back in those days was really based on spears, swords, and then the bow and arrow. What's fascinating is the bow and arrow was one of the leading advancements, even above the muskets. It could be used quicker, it was more accurate, it was more penetrating. A musket, while automated, had a round ball and wasn't very accurate, and it had to be used at close range. So what's interesting is the American people started to come across, we were using those muskets against the Indians. And what was interesting is there wasn't much change, there wasn't much penetration. And most of that was because these Indians were so skilled at shooting arrows, they could shoot somewhere between 10 and 20 a minute. And many of them could do that on horseback without the use of hands on the horse. So what was happening is that they were winning in a technological battle, not only with the bow and arrow, but also with the horse. So then you look at muskets and they say, well, this is pretty good. We're going to start shooting them. Whoops. But then what happened was these round-balled muskets could not penetrate just the cowhide of the horses that were used in the shields to protect these Indians. So it wasn't until the later 1800s when the revolvers came out and they changed to a hollow point bullet and to the pointed bullets that we started to really make some moves into moving across the United States. And that was all based on a technological advantage. Now, another thing to talk about is what's happened, at least what we still happen, is complacency. And of course, assumptions. Like, just away from me. Thank you. So, all right, better. Is that okay? A little bit more? Yep. All right. Thank you. My wife complains I'm too loud as well, so sorry about that. The next phase is of complacency and assumptions. What's really fascinating is in the Ottoman Empire and the expansion of that and how they continued to dominate from Turkey onwards was, again, about a technological advantage, which again goes back to the gun. You know, before that, they were using spears and sticks, and everybody was kind of just running each other. They found out that those skills take years, right, to learn with proficiency. Instead, the gunpowder, which wasn't even created by them, nor was the musket, but they could use that in a more automated way to advance their progression of dominating the area. What's fascinating is that all of their enemies were still going through the same style of just marching in line and then running at you as fast as they can with the sticks to try to get to you before they could shoot you. So what was happening was there was complacency on the enemy side, but there was advancements on a very few on how to attack. And that is starting to be what we see today in today's attacking environment. Another thing that we talk about is how that has advanced into, say, a couple hundred more years when we got to World War I and World War II. Fascinating discussion about this in the sense that World War I had some tanks, and if anybody remembers that, they were basically just poor metal. People could just really just sit in there. They're usually getting attacked easily. And the United States had thousands, and all of our allies had thousands, but the Germans only had a handful. But one of their generals named Romulus, after the war and the Treaty of Versailles, recognized that the tanks were going to be the advancement for the future. However, the Allies knew the same thing, and they put in rules and regulations that Germany could not build tanks. And instead, they had to be limited on their tanks, on their airplanes and trains and any other item that could actually advance their military. But what they did is Germans, is they got very smart, and they started to use pieces and parts for tractors and farm equipment that when they were pulled together, actually created, one of the strongest tanks ever recorded. The problem was that it was so sophisticated that the infrastructure around them couldn't sustain it. They made the assumption that once they put all these tanks together, they would have the people that were trained, because these, unlike the American tanks of World War II, which could be really driven by anybody could drive a car, these particular tanks required specialization. Second thing is, when you're going through mud, you're going through rocks, you got bullets coming at you, they get damaged. The problem is these sophisticated tanks needed specialized people to come fix it with the assumption that they were going to be there. But in the middle of a war, those people couldn't get to those tanks, and therefore this cadre of tanks that they had assembled, which ended up being around 160,000 tanks, ended up being useless. So the point is, you have technology that can be used when there's not complacency to advance yourself, and then you can get technology that's so advanced that if it can't come together, it can also be assumed that it's going to be the best thing or the best tool in your toolbox. So that's leading me to another discussion, which is just about embracing change. The idea here, just a quick one, around back in the 1807, lamps were all lit by people. They were all this manual effort to go from lamp to lamp to lamp to lamp to light them and brighten up the city. Mostly done in London. They're also in Paris. It started to expand around the world. But what automation started to create was this ability for incandescent lights. And that obviated the need for people to be actually do this particular work. Again, jobs easier. So let's get to the quick agenda. The idea behind that was just to get your mind frame into the sense of things can change and they can change for the better. Also make your jobs easier. When we started this company 5 years ago called Sepco Security, the idea was there's not enough talent, there's not enough skilled talent, and frankly, people are working their tails off to protect their companies, their organizations, the United States, and make this world a better place. And what's awesome about this place is that that's all of you guys. What I love is I've never been here. This is my first time, and this is a wonderful extension of what I see as DEF CON. And I love that. These is all of you guys are the hard workers that are making this place a safer place. So my objective has also been to do that, but from more of a vendor side and from the business side of the fence. So what I'm going to talk to you about is an asset primer. Also loved seeing the previous presentation that the number one thing they said needs to be done is asset management. And people talk about it all the time, and security cares about it like crazy. What I've never understood is why IT doesn't. Why is it that IT sees it as fourth or fifth on the list? But when it comes to security, that is the number one thing. If I don't know who has what, doing what, from where, how do I do my job? I'm just chasing things around. That's the infamous whack-a-mole. And everybody's tired of whacking a mole, right? Let's go ahead and get the jobs done. I'll talk a little bit about vulnerability and exposure management as a topic. And I'm actually going to try to demo a hacking demonstration here. It is recorded because nothing goes well live, but I'll talk through it as an interesting thing, and then we do a quick Q&A. So quick asset management primer. What we see is that organizations are missing about 20% of everything. When I say everything, that means because of the advent of devices and users, /identities coming online, in just the past decade, it's gone from an estimated 12 billion devices about 10 years ago to about 30 billion devices about 7 years ago to about 50 billion devices just a couple of years ago, with an expected 75 billion devices being networked and connected here in 2025. That's an enormous set of items, objects that have to be kept up with, monitored, managed. And what we also see is that they're missing controls. Controls of all types. That could be an EDR. That could be an identity access management control. That could be a policy. And a lot of them, as we all know, cybersecurity could pretty much be mitigated tremendously if we could just patch, right? If anybody's ever used AutoMox, they used to have a saying, those patch that shit. I used to love it because I was like, God, yeah. But think about the process of doing that, the times that you have to get there, the machines that are offline, the policies you got to get through, all the approvals to be able to do this. It's an enormous challenge of what's going on. And then finally, we talk about some just productivity applications. Now that everything is going cloud, or it seems to be everything going cloud, and I'd love to get a discussion on that because I'm kind of a visionary when I get into these organizations, and I actually think a lot of things are coming back to on-prem, which is interesting. The world does go in circles, and in almost my 30 years of doing this, I've seen it happen 3 times. And so I see that we can see some things certainly changing for the better. Now, when we talk about asset management, if we go back to this morning's conversation, I really loved it when, if you saw the turning point of that presentation of the Pink Panthers, right, and finding the Dubai jewel heist, it was one dude on a cell phone in the middle of a mall that they were able to track all the attributes down and then start to unravel that entire organization. And so what we see is that when you're talking about the asset, it's not just, oh, I got an iPhone or I got an iPad, but it's all the types of assets that are there, ephemeral, whether they're physical, whether they're owned by the organization, personally owned, where they are. Again, are they on-premise? Are they off-premise? Are they within my supply chain? Are they at data centers? Are they around the world? The height, we call it height, which is the details. There's a key element between the physical presence of a control on a device and the actual state, which again, loved the presentation before because it's all talking about, is it configured? Like how many times you're like, yep, hit the button, deploy the software, and that thing's gone. I'm closing the help desk ticket. And it wasn't done. I mean, CrowdStrike's ordeal that everybody realizes was a great example of that, where it sent out, hit the patch, things shut down. Now I'm trying to fix it all. I don't even know where they are. I don't know what's happening. It's going to take me weeks to fix this thing. And so the presence in the state is really important. And then, of course, we talk about time. The temporal time element is I want it to be real time. I also need to know the history, right? How is that item, person, application, the vulnerabilities there? How has that transformed over the course of hours, days, weeks, months? And so we follow that. And we're bringing that to date with the architecture. How do you get that done, right? How do you capture all of this? And what we see in the asset management space, it is that you do have to tap into all your existing tools you have today. Now, what's beautiful is APIs are abundant. Makes it very, very easy. Now, people have relied on assets to be vulnerability management. I'm going to get into that. This is why it starts the debate. Is it dead? Is it alive? Is it even useful? It's been around for 30 years. As a little guy in the vendor space, I love beating the crap out of technologies that have been around for 30 years. Why? Because they don't change. They can't. These are publicly held companies that have stable technologies that cannot modify that to advance themselves quickly. So smaller companies come in and they provide a better ability to do the jobs. So when we look at this, the idea was looking at all these different inputs of like endpoints and cloud, your network, your identities, of course, your IoT devices and some applications, feeding into the tools, right, that you have to monitor and manage and control these things, and then tying that into ability to aggregate, to correlate, and then the specializing of deduplicating and deconflicting so that you're not having to turn to each device or tool that you have and try to figure out, wait, CrowdStrike says this, my Active Directory says that, my endpoint security says this. It's physically impossible to do this with any accuracy and currency. And then putting that into doing something about it, right? Putting it into my SOAR or putting it into my SIM, putting it into my other workflows, whether they're manual or automated. And that's the typical architecture we see on the asset management side. Now, let me get into a little bit of going back to vulnerability management. Fascinating. Like I said, I'm on the older side. I started my business here in the early 1990s. Pretty sad to say, but it was so basic back then. I mean, security really didn't exist, honestly, when I got into it. We were building infrastructure. I started my career with Compact Computer Corporation, which was literally building the servers for the internet. And I laughed, like, what was the internet back then, right? Just a connected network. And we used to use different tools just to find things. And we use vulnerability assessment because it doesn't really manage anything. It actually assesses. It actually finds and discovers. But it's not really managing. Managing is actually doing something about it. And we look back and we had these tools that were just simple code script tools to go find things. Then, of course, if people remember Satan as one of the first kind of UI-based tools, very cool. But it was also just discovering and identifying the systems that were out there that it could actually scan and see. Then, of course, internet security systems, Nessus came around, Nmap, Netcat. All of those tool sets are great. What's interesting is that's in the 90s, and here we are in 2024, and they're almost the same, right? The advancement has been very limited in what the exposure capabilities it finds in the context. So that's a little bit about my background. What's fascinating is we just talked about vulnerabilities are exploding. And it's no longer just CVE 1, right? CVE 2, 5, 6, 7, 10, 15. Then you've got the cloud you got to consider, the IoT vulnerabilities that are out there, AppSec, either Chasm, if you're familiar with that, I'll get into it. They're finding that now there's like 11, 12 plus sources of vulnerabilities, right? It's not just my Tenable, Rapid7, or Qualys anymore, or my Nessus that finds it. It's coming from everything I've got. Everybody's reporting something, and that is the challenge, right? CVEs, CVEs, CVEs. That's what everybody's touting. But as was just mentioned, even at the same presentation before, they're like, how many? The question was asked to the crowd. How many vulnerabilities are you dealing with? Over 100,000. Well, I don't even know where to start with 100,000, right? I could probably send a patch out that might cover a couple of thousand, depends on how many devices I've got, right? And every single tool set is reporting something. Now, what's even more challenging is if one is relying on one tool alone, you're wrong. Because look at the conflicts. Some of them are unique. Some are seen by other tools. Some aren't seen at all, right? Some of them are duplicates. And the idea is, how does that get resolved, right? It's a challenge because now the compliance and the regulatory requirements, frankly, are just behavior that we've been in for 30 years. It's like, yeah, I just got to do it. but just got to do it is killing you. You guys are working too hard, right? And the idea is you don't even know where to start. You can run down dead ends, go to false positives, false negatives, just trying to get somewhere to move the organization forward. Now, one of the reasons why this is happening is that this is a quote by a gentleman from Expel, CISO from Expel. It's like, the challenge is we're just stitching tools together. And the challenge with that is the tools don't talk to each other. We are deep Microsoft partners. And Microsoft was like, look, dude, we don't even talk to each other in the organization, much less the product guys, right? We're all siloed. And the other side of it is that you have to have people to manage all these things. And many of you are the ones going, yeah, I'm he or she. I'm the one that manages these tools, right? And the question is, are you interacting with the other person on the other side? Sometimes you don't like them. You're having a bad day. You just don't care. I mean, all of those go into real play of real life. And you can see here that when one is trying to understand what's really going on and what needs to be protected, those numbers can be very significantly different. And so we sit here, and I was just giving an example with CrowdStrike as an example. You got Tenable, and then you have Active Directory, and you can see how the total number of devices was 20,226. And I'm going to get a little demo of this later about asset management, but you can also see which ones are missing the endpoint security. And you're sitting there going, wait a minute. I've got CrowdStrike only on the 3,052, but I've got 14,000, look in the middle, 14,000 that should technically have CrowdStrike on there. Now, there's probably reasons why some of them aren't, some of them don't. Maybe it's a server that needs protection, you name it. But 14,000 to 3,000 is a huge number. And as everybody in this room knows, it only takes one, right? Only takes one. So how do you reduce that exposure? And so I'm not trying to knock on CVEs. So it's like, yes to the CVEs, but not to only CVEs. So there's a great post that we'd found. Is like, how do we start to talk about this? It's not from the vendor's perspective, but from the user's perspective. And there's a gentleman in a bank in London who was like, look, and he gave us this discussion around, you got the CVSS as a score. Awesome. Then you've got the exploit has a score. 0 days, have a score. You got proof of concept exploits. That's a score. Question, there's scores that aren't related. And I found this earlier in my career with the engineering on the vendor side, where the engineers they're given the 1 to 10, but 1 to 10 for me is going to be a different 1 to 10 for you, right? They're not going to correlate from engineer to engineer on what's important. And so now you've got all these scoring mechanisms that are highly confusing in the sense that they don't agree with each other. Sometimes they can be very close, and sometimes they have these very disparate numbers. And so the idea is, even if it has a score, does it really mean it's important, right? Like, for example, going back to the context around that particular device. If I, Greg Fitzgerald, have a CVE of a 9 out of a 10 or an 80 out of 100, however it wants to be recorded, but I'm not really touching many bits of information that I need to actually violate the organization or have the organization at threat of, or if I recently got patched, but I've got one CVE that's showing that's really vulnerable, but I don't actually use that type of software, then is it relevant, right? But that's not the job that typically falls within the cybersecurity personnel, right? I don't know. And Greg's he's just some dude up there talking, and I know he's on the management side of the house. But it's very important for what you do as your job to either you're going to chase down that path and make sure I'm covered, or if you're going to go down Sally the secretary, who, by the way, touches every executive, who, by the way, has the username passwords for all the financial departments, and she needs to be protected, right? So that's one of the things that we see about don't just look at CVEs, you got to look a little bit further. But vulnerability management has been around for decades. Everyone has a program, and if you don't, you should, right? Got to have a program, mostly for compliance regulation, even if it's NIST. Like, hey, I'm just trying to follow a framework to keep us protected. Talked about all the sources that are just expanding, and they just continue to grow because what Tenable and others see, it may not be what AWS sees or Microsoft sees or any other vendor for that matter, and is growing in number. And the worst part, again, goes back to the manual grind of saying, I've got X number of vulnerabilities and I need to patch Y. And how am I going to cross that boundary within common sense? And we talk about like the idea is that your cybersecurity program is probably a good one, because I know you wouldn't be working on something that's not good. But what it finds out is it's not that your EDR is not good enough, that you've got a different tool, you need a different manager, you need somebody to manage it for you. It's it wasn't there in the first place. And the same thing is, are you patching it? And it's not that you're patching it slowly, it's that there wasn't even a patch configuration tool on it to get it out there, right? And that's because these tools are coming on and off the network literally by the second. People were accessing applications, getting off applications by the second. And so trying to keep up with that physically is an impossible thing. But I'm going to get to the point of getting out of the esoteric piece here in the sense of Gartner. How many people follow Gartner? Okay, that's good. Kinda. I know it's the only guys out there. As a vendor, they drive us bonkers, right? Because they kind of make a claim of where the market's going, and at the same time, they're behind the curve. All right. So what we've seen here is they have this hype cycle concept. And the hype cycle concept is that with vulnerability management, first of all, they did one thing already. They renamed it to assessment. Because what they realized is, wait a minute, Tenable, Rapid7, Qualys, they're not managing anything. They're assessing, but they're not managing it. Second thing is, so they took it off of the market. Second thing is that they're retiring the whole concept. The whole concept is being reinvented. And is being reinvented to this concept of the exposure management, or you might have heard about threat exposure management. That when I talk to them, that is not a tool. So the worst thing that happens for somebody like me is that the marketing and the sales efforts are confusing as hell, and everybody lies. And they lie in the sense that, not that they want to on purpose lie, it's that they think they're doing it. Right? They think they're providing that. But Gartner comes back and says there's not a tool that does that, because that's a combination of technologies, people, and processes, which we all know is how you actually protect things and organizations. But it's a really fascinating concept of, is vulnerability management going away? Because what they actually come back to say is, look, it's actually expanding, right? Traditional vulnerability assessment has a bunch of attributes that are tied to it. But then, as mentioned before, there's prioritization, and there are companies that do prioritization. The problem is they're doing it on either a weak or non-existent asset inventory. So it goes back to, well, if you don't have your assets together, how in the heck are you going to prioritize anything? Because you're going to be missing a ton of stuff. As I mentioned, 20% of everybody in here is missing stuff. I only say that because we have over 1,000 customers, and we've looked at every single one of them, and the average is around 20%. Some people are doing a little bit better, some people are doing worse, but nobody's got 100%. And so we look at this exposure management, and there's tools like Armis, and I'm throwing mine up there because that's our goal, right? Is to provide the ability to automate all this asset inventory and the prioritization, so now you know where to start. I'm not saying we do it all. I'm saying we can tell you where to start, and we can automate into help desk and other things. But we're starting to see the market transition a little bit. So I'll go back into a little bit of the CVEs and the CVEs plus environmental variables. So the reason why this is important is just looking at environmental elements are the who, what, where, when, and even how that needs to be answered. And as everybody knows, getting to that answer or those answers, while the statement is simple, it's freaking hard. It takes time. It takes energy. It takes people talking to each other. It takes tools being able to deduplicate it and deconflict it and parsed and then normalized and then put into some sort of workflow. The business context, like I mentioned, does the business actually need this? Do I need to address this? I got 10,000 things I'm trying to address in a single day. And my coffee is freaking getting cold because I can't even drink that, how busy I'm trying to get. Prioritize, and then validation. How many people here know, I did this to a CISO conference, it's like, how many people know that many of their help desk tickets just get closed because it's end of the day? Right? Like, dude, I want to go home, right? It'll pop up tomorrow, but I'm going to close it today, right? And trying to report that back up into senior management is also a bear, right? Because you can't leave those help desk tickets open, and you sure as heck don't want a ton being open and remaining open. So they get closed out, but the issue is never resolved, right? And it needs to be resolved. We have a CISO on our advisory board, which is funny because they're not paid and they're not compensated in any way, shape, or form. But they put out their own videos where it's funny to talk about where they're like, "Dude, we thought we had this covered, and we realized not so much." Is my point. Remediating what they're doing, and then the metrics of understanding what's the progress. So I'm going to show you a little bit of demos here in just a second. Which talks about the correlation of the environmental variables, gives you 3. That 1 + 1 is 3 is exactly where everybody wants to go. The second one is adding business context, which I already addressed. Weaponizing and visualizing. So here's the concept about weaponizing is understanding the devices that have controls and those that don't, those that can be exploited and those that could be exploited and moved laterally. And then what could be visualized so I can actually understand it, right? We don't want to have to live in kind of rows and column world. I need visualization, especially for the guys. It's scientifically proven that we're more visual in nature, right? So we need something that gives us some sort of view that I can grasp and do something about. Then we get to remediation with validation. I'm kind of going through that again because it's nice to know, for example, that if people are remediating, here's an example, in your teams, and you're seeing that, okay, I'm going to show you this demo too, but I've got 500 vulnerabilities of items that are being addressed, but I'm recognizing 119 have been cleaned, 9 have not been cleaned. Sally's working on these, and she's cleaned these 10, but Joe's only cleaned 2. What's the issue? Does Joe need more training? Does he not have the resources? Has he been on holiday? Right? Am I keeping up with the pace of fixing and remediating these things? And then finally, generating actionable metrics. Again, just because I know and have visibility to this, do I actually have metrics that I can report up? Because I know the challenge for everybody is I'm doing my job, man. But if upper management kind of doesn't care in the sense of unless they can see it and monitor it, your job ends up being thankless, right? Because you're doing the right thing. As I mentioned, you're working your tail off, and it's the right thing to do. So that's awesome. But if upper management doesn't have a way to report it up, then they're just like, yeah, you're doing your job. But you can be rewarded by showing the progress, giving and highlighting. We were talking earlier with another speaker, which is about training everybody so that they see progress and what's going on and getting that IT and cybersecurity knowledge as high up in the organization as possible so that budgets start getting more allocated to this area. Because what is not seen is ignored, right? What we don't know, we can't protect, right? So the more visibility around all this generates better behaviors and better resources for everyone. So let me see if I can get to this, okay? I'm going to give you this particular demo, and forgive me if I walk through it the wrong way, but the reason I'm bringing this up is I'm going to fall back on the side of vulnerability assessments, not dying, right? So the vulnerability management tools and vulnerability efforts are kind of fruitless in the sense of I'm just overwhelmed. I get all these CVEs. I'm not getting the context I need. The time of these, right? I have them scheduled out. I can't necessarily see in the inside all the time. There's lots of devices that can't be scanned, like heart monitors. We have hospital. There's like, dude, don't even touch, right? Don't even close. They'll literally kill somebody. We're like, all right, no problem. You got schools on the other hand. They're like, dude, scan everything, right? All the time. And so we see different things and we get industrial robots. So our team did an example here, which is really fascinating. It was we got a PLC attached right here to a robot. The robot's called a Fanuc. It's a robot that is in lots of manufacturing organizations. It's really designed to replace a human, of course, to work consistently and effectively all the time in the right manner, so that it can be used in a good example. Does anybody remember Stuxnet? Okay, Stuxnet was a very interesting attack. if you do a little Google or Chat GPT, it's really fascinating. I was a part of a research group that was following that, where the whole intention, of course, was to restrict the development of the Iranian uranium facilities, but to be able to do it in a very subtle way, so that the machines were making centrifuges move at different speeds, sometimes faster, sometimes slower than normal, and to manipulate the monitoring devices so that those speed differences were not detected. And the idea was just to delay the development of uranium and try to restrict the nuclear developments. And that was in the whole Iranian nuclear the discussions back when that was happening in the kind of 2010, 11, 12 timeframes. And so as an example here, you sit there and go, okay, there are use cases where we need to find things that do not have controls on them, because, right, my control only knows what it sees. My EDR, MDR only sees where the agents resides. My network monitoring only sees the components that are between the networks. And then my scanner only sees what it scans. So I'm trying to encompass all these tools to gather what I've got, but again, they don't talk to each other, and I know I'm missing a lot. So how do I find other things that aren't there, like this? Because this has an operating system that is proprietary, right? And it is one that is it may be connected to the internet. Some cases it may be air gap, but the idea was, the intention was to do a test with the robot, showing that it can be violated, and that it was, the idea was to show through this example, it was just to touch a Coca-Cola can. That's all I was going to do. So I'm going to try to walk you through this as it goes on here, so you could see us testing this, just to show that the PLC that we have right here was specifically designed to only touch the top. So you imagine this thing could do drilling, it can do all kinds of things, but this was just to be lightly touch the top of a Coca-Cola can. So with that, what we started to see was that when it gets to this point, I'm going to process through it, where it touches the can lightly. We have it in a code, and you can see us connecting that. And this is actually connected to the device. It's hard connected, but you can also have a controller like these Rockwell or these Siemens controllers. But you can also ping it. So what we realized is interesting. We'll put in the IP address for the ping. We can get to the network. This is fascinating. So then what we're going to see is, if we can touch it, let's see what happens if we just type that IP address into the and oh my gosh, it actually has a web server. It has a 1992 type web server, but nonetheless, it has a web server on there. And with that, it's giving these options about the machine that we can actually do something about it. So we're going to look at the configuration. Look, here it is. In 2023 is when we found out that we could, it was the version of this particular device, and we could see all these attributes associated to it. Okay, that's cool. We can see what's happening. The second thing is we can see what kind of active programs there are. Now, in this, you can see this thing called CAN-LS. So that was the code. That was the program designed to just touch the top of the can. And you can see right here on the bottom right, 205.314. Okay, that was just the link that needed to go down and touch it. So what we found is, this is very interesting. Just on a web server that happens to be exposed, I can actually do something with it. Oh my goodness, it has a remote pendant. So that PLC device that you saw holding can now actually be done virtually. And with that, you can see that you can actually start to get some configuration information that, oh my goodness, I can actually talk to this thing remotely, right? I can TCP into it. I can FTP into it. And when I FTP into it, oh, interesting, anonymous username and password? Is that real? But if I go to a public website, this is the Fanuc FTP server. Whoops, goodness, sorry guys. I hope I don't have to restart this thing. I apologize. All right, get you right here. Okay, here we go. I can actually see the robot's name, and I can FTP into this. But if I see this anonymous in the password, and I actually see that I can go to this publicly available website, and it says, yeah, look at this. If it's enabled, right, by default, and you can actually probably connect through FTP without credentials. Like, oh my gosh, right? This particular device is exposed. Now, all I have to do is just manipulate it. So, okay, I'm going to try to manipulate it. I'm going to see if I can actually talk to it. I'm going to put in the IP address. I'm going to see if I can do a get. I'm going to see if I can get to it and try to look at the directory and see if I can find that file, that can.ls file. So as I look into it, I can see throughout everything in this particular machine, and I'm going to go and I say, there it is. There's this can right there, ls file, which when I grab it, I'm going to see if I can actually download it. Because if I can download it, I can do something to it, I think. Because if I can get it, I can probably post to it as well. So here we are. I'm going to take it. I'm looking at the file. I'm going to actually save it here. I'm going to open up this can file. And you can see, there it is. That's all the elements that are in that file, that program. And it says 205. So what I'm going to do is going to go down there. I'm going to change that to 305. So I'm going to extend it a little bit more. So I'm going to see if I can manipulate it. Great. Within the file, I can actually do something with this by manipulating the file itself. Now the question is, can I upload it? So I'm going to save it here to my machine. I'm going to rename it Can Crush. So Can Crush is going to be the new name, and we're going to go back and see within the file server if it's going to upload. Here you go. Put it up into the file server. So with that, you can see that we were about to do that. There it is. It's actually posting, and it says, okay, Can Crush. Now it's still just a file, right? It really hasn't done anything yet. I'm actually in the PLC. I'm going to see if I can actually look at the variables to see if I can add this to the default programming of the machine. Because if I can do that, then instead of going to Can, it'll go to Can Crush. And you can see there you are. The 305 is listed within this particular program. Now I'm going to go back down. You can see I'm going to go back in. Again, still using anonymous, right? There's no authentication. There's no restrictions. There's no way that's keeping me or even testing who I am. And I'm going to go up here and I'm going to look within here and I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to see that these default program says Can, and I'm going to actually rename it to Can Crush. And with that renaming, it's actually accepting it, and now it's in the system itself. Now it's on the robot, and it can start to take action on a new programming direction. And so when we do that, we reboot it because it's under default. Again, no authentication. It's going to automatically connect to the Can Crush element, and we're going to run the exercise. So here we are. The robot gets rolling, and we think it's going to touch it, but because we manipulated it, we've, in essence, hacked the machine. As you can imagine, there we go. It's crushed. So why we bring this up is that this is exactly what happened to Stuxnet. If you don't have a vulnerability scanner to know that these machines that don't have controls on them are available to potentially someone, and that they happen to have these particular open policies, right, of authentication, if you know about it, you can do something about it, right? See something, do something kind of concept in terms of following that model. So we've looked at, what you can really do in terms of assets and understand what you have. Let's see if I can go through it again. There's the other piece here, but I'm running out of time, but is around asset visualization. In this particular effort, what typically happens here is, I'm going to give you a quick example, is that our particular tool, and there are other tools that are out there that can aggregate all your applications and tool sets and give you a visualization so that you can understand what really is going on with them. In this particular case, you can see it says there's 10,215 devices. Now, on the right-hand side, it's showing the operating systems and some versions. And so when you click into a couple of these elements on the tool sets, this is Active Directory right now. And so Active Directory has this understanding. Let's see. I'm going to see if I can get to that piece too. This is, again, the challenges of running a program that's not live. Right now, what we're selecting is we've chosen particular like Linux, Microsoft operating systems with CrowdStrike on it. And so now you can actually visualize those devices that have CrowdStrike, those devices in Active Directory that don't, and the cross sections that do. And here this is actually showing there's 90 devices that do not have any protection on them, but are listed in your Active Directory. Obviously, that would be a concern. So the idea is, what do we do about it, and how do we expand on it? Let's take a look. We're going to go ahead and expand onto this and see if there's a patch management. This would have to be Automox as a patch management, and it shows what the cross-section is showing here on the devices. And if I actually go into where the Active Directory we clicked into one more piece, which was the end of life. So it was a Windows machine, Windows 2005 R2. And I'm looking at all the tools that I have to see if those 15 devices are protected by anything. So here I am. I've now found 15 devices in my environment that are in the Active Directory that have no protection at all, that are exposed, and they're end of life. So there's no patch even available for it, and there's nothing protecting them. So that would be a key visible insight in terms of your asset. The next piece is around exposures. And then this exposure model is, I need to look at all my devices and see the vulnerabilities. So when we get into that one, it was around understanding like your total number of devices and the total number of users that are in your organization, and then what are the tool systems that are driving that. And in this particular case, I'll quickly go through this, where you can see that it's coming from CrowdStrike and Jamf and Automox and AWS, my Tenable, my Sentinel-1, and another Active Directory. And it's actually showing that there's, out of the 34,000, there's actually 12,771 unique devices that are there. And then with this, I can actually see each and every one of those 13,771 devices, and I can see what systems actually see them. And if I click into that, I can actually see now all the context that this has no configuration management. It's got certain CVEs, a Google Chrome V8 that's listed there, another CVE that's around Microsoft that's listed. I can see it's tagged as a critical asset. It's tagged as a critical asset. Oh man, sorry team. Okay. There you go. It's tagged as a critical asset. It's owned by Jared. It's got these particular elements associated to what it is, what the vulnerabilities are there, what operating system's there. And then when I go into the details, I can see from each of the tool sets. So you have an option, of course, of going to each tool, or you can see it just in an aggregated fashion and how they're correlated together, and to actually see the kind of minute by minute, second by second change of that device as reported by each tool. And then on the left-hand side, you get to see the summation of all the CVEs that are on it, who's owned it, where it's been, what MAC addresses, what physical addresses are there, and really get at your fingertips this true understanding of what this device is and what the problems are that it has. And then you can go deeper into the vulnerabilities that are listed that are there. I'm going to quit there because my demo skills are obviously lacking, so I apologize. But I'm going to summarize it also that, getting back to understanding, are they really dead, right? Are vulnerability scanners dead? I think it's up to everybody. I think it's really more about going back to the modernization of technology and how you use it to make your jobs easier, quicker, faster, and stronger. And so we are still waiting on it, but as a vendor and as kind of somebody prognosticator of what's coming, if those tools do not add on more value, what we're seeing by customer purchases is that they're taking the million, and we got one customer is $1.5 million on Tenable, no, Rapid7, excuse me, on Rapid7. They're like, I'm pulling that back to $100,000. I'm just going to really focus on what I need to monitor and manage, hence my assets, and then I'm going to fix that. I can save my organization over $1.5 million and I can use that budget to reallocate to the tools and systems that I really, really want, because that particular technology is starting to degrade in its value to me, just as all of them do, right? Everything has to modernize. So one of the things I'm about to end here is that we do a free assessment. We call it the 311, as in your phone number, and that give us 3 sources, like an EDR or patch management or Active Directory, cloud-based, be non-intrusive. We'll just hook up to the APIs, give us one person. People go, oh, it's a project. I don't have time for this, da, da, da. And then give me 1 hour. And in that, with your own data, we could show you the value of all this coming together to be aggregated so that you have an accurate inventory and you have an understanding of the vulnerabilities and what to work on. So thanks again for your time today. I'm sorry for a little bit of the demo environment, but thanks again for listening. I'm open for questions and to meet anybody after this. Thank you.